Say hello to the all-new Alexa Plus and see how Alexa can do so much more for you. Need tickets to see your favorite artist? Craving your comfort restaurant? Just sit back, relax, and talk naturally. Alexa's on it. It learns your style, anticipates what's next, and makes it happen across Echo, Fire TV, and more. Learn more at amazon.com/new Alexa.
This episode is brought to you by Netflix. Jay Kelly, the new film from Academy Award nominee Noah Baumbach. George Clooney stars as an actor confronting his past and present on a journey of self-discovery, alongside Adam Sandler as his devoted manager. Critics are calling it a declaration of love to the chaotic art of filmmaking, with the Wall Street Journal praising it as a transcendent comedy drama. Watch Jay Kelly December 5th, only on Netflix.
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Northern Kentucky University political scientist Michael Baranowski. I'm joined today by my conservative counterpart, University of Austin economist and former congressional staffer Tim Kaine, and political scientist Michael Levy. Hey, guys.
Mike, good to see you. Good to see you both, Tim and Mike. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I know I did. It was nice, kind of quiet, but good to be back at it here. But before we get started, I want to thank Nathan and Mel, both of whom are new Patreon supporters. And I also want to let folks know that for the first time ever, we're doing here on The Politics Guys I guess you call it sort of a special small business Saturday week sale or something like that. Anyway, but here's the deal. From now until next Saturday, which is December 6th, we are offering two special deals. I don't think we've ever done this before. Again, who knows? My memory, God knows. But anyway, first, we're going to give you an additional 10% discount on annual support at the insider and sustainers levels. Now, that's off on top of the 10% discount you already get with an annual support. So, hey, you can do that math, right? 20% off. And if you've been a supporter for a while, maybe at the fans level, maybe this is a time you want to increase your support and help out the show. And to take advantage of this offer, there's a special code you can use at checkout. I have that in the show notes. And we also have a nearly free first month offer for new monthly supporters at any level. Now, I wanted to make it a completely free first month, but Patreon only let me crank the discount up to 90%. So that's what I did. And again, that to get that offer, there's another code, and I will have that in the show notes. You can just use that at checkout. And so remember, both these offers only good for the next week. They expire after Saturday, December 6th. And yeah, there you go. All right. Well, guys, we have a lot to talk about this week. And Tim, how about if you get us started?
I would love to. So our first topic up for discussion is Ukraine. And as you guys know, this has been going on for 3 years. February 24th will mark the 4-year anniversary of Russia's invasion. And they went after the whole enchilada. They didn't just try to get a little bit more territory. They actually tried to invade Ukraine, capital Kiev. Ukraine resisted, and it's been a very bloody stalemate. We've seen the evolution of war with the heavy use of drones since then. The news is that about a week ago, Trump basically issued an ultimatum saying Ukraine has until Thanksgiving to agree with our new 28-point plan, or they're going to be on their own, and they can fight their little hearts out. That got a lot of pushback, particularly when some stories leak that this plan was largely based on a Russian proposal. It comes from negotiations that Steve Witkoff, an envoy that the president trusts dearly, longtime friend, billionaire, but he negotiated directly with Kirill Dmitriev in Russia. Apparently that plan's been underway since late October, but I actually got interested and I wanted to spend a minute during the intro to go over the 28-point plan. What are the 28 points? The big four, I think, of those 28 points are ones that Ukraine has rejected in the past. First of all, Ukraine has to give up land that it actually currently controls, so it would cede territory. The Russians would also cede a little bit of territory. That's one of the points, but much less. That's in the Donetsk region, the big focus of fighting. 2, there would be no NATO membership ever for Ukraine. 3, there would be no foreign troops stationed within Ukraine. And 4, the agreement would even limit the size of the Ukrainian army going forward. Some people likened it to previous peace deals in the past that led to world wars, right? So preceding every great world war, there's a peace in our time. That seemed pretty trenchant analysis by Ann Applebaum. But there are some other points here, too. One is it would grant complete amnesty to both sides for war crimes. So there would be no truth or reconciliation. It would be recognition that the territory taken is now part of Russia, and sanctions on Russia. Not only that, it promises that Russia rejoins the G8 immediately, which you'd think the other part of the G8 might have a say in. On the upside for Ukraine, there'd be $200 billion committed to investment in Ukraine. A lot of that would be frozen Russian assets. So that seems to me at least to be a big concession. And the weirdest one that's not being talked about in the news that we may spend some time on is it commits Ukraine to having a new election within 100 days. So it creates some political instability in Ukraine. Since then, since Trump issued his ultimatum, Thanksgiving's passed. And what happened? Well, Ukraine's national security advisor, Rustem Umerov, agreed to the deal on Tuesday, 4 days ago now. Said, yeah, we agree. And I think this was a smart political move, said that Zelensky was ready to travel to the U.S. for a signing before the end of November. Just a few minor minor things to work out. And he's got some real support in the Secretary of State Rubio's office to, make sure it's not completely favorable. The Russians have now pushed back and, in fact, done succeeding attacks, including one last night you two may not know about. Starting at midnight last night in Ukraine until 9:30 a.m. this morning, there have been massive drone and missile attacks, 36 missiles, 596 drones. They're attacking the energy infrastructure. There may be something like 1 million people right now without power in Ukraine. So the continuous assault by the Russians has been very effective. I can't make a prediction of where this goes, but I think the fact is our president has really been distracted by some other issues. Horrible attack by a legal immigrant in the U.S. on two National Guard troops in D.C. The political environment in the U.S. has shifted, so there's actually a lot less pressure to get this deal. And my light prediction before we go into discussion is it's just going to be more of the same. There will be no peace. There will be no peace deal. The Russians will continue to attack. Whether or not Ukraine can survive, I don't know. And in fact, the Army Secretary, this is the last bit of news, Dan Driscoll has been the key figure. Some people have raised eyebrows. Why not the Secretary of Defense or Secretary of State? Dan Driscoll's an old friend from law school of J.D. Vance, known to be a pessimist of Ukraine's ability to survive another year. There's good reason, and I think the president is sincere in his hope to just end the bloodshed. But Dan Driscoll, our Army Secretary, has been in Geneva, been in Russia, maybe have visited Ukraine. Right now, I think is still in Abu Dhabi, where all the parties are going back and forth. Meaning the Russians and the Ukrainians have representatives there. So this is ongoing, but there's a lot of skepticism. So,
well, I got to say, I am heartened that we're finally, really making a push to help out our Russian allies against the horrible Ukrainian aggressors and really punishing them for all the things that they've, done, their atrocities. And obviously I'm joking, right, guys, because this is just, I read this peace deal and I thought, wait a second, who are allies here? Who invaded whom? I agree with you, Tim. This isn't going to be signed. There's no way that I don't think Putin's going to say, oh, yeah, $100 billion in frozen assets going to rebuilding Ukraine. Yeah, I'm all for that. Russia has the advantage. If they keep on grinding this thing out, eventually, especially if Donald Trump walks the U.S. away from helping out Ukraine, well, they're going to just end up taking more territory. The facts on the ground are going to continue to favor Russia. I don't think they're going to sign this. I think you're right. Ukraine certainly has a lot more reason to sign this, and the fighting's going to go on, and it's just friggin' awful.
Yeah, I think when I look at what's going on and take the peace deal as it was proposed by the Russians and the Americans first, and I don't know who wrote it, and I'm not sure Marco Rubio even knows who wrote it based upon the conflicting reports that we have, but it's a total non-starter. And if you really look at the bottom line, it's the Russian plan or the Russian-U.S. plan looks like everything Russia wanted. And Ukraine's and the E3's proposal, the one from France, Germany, and the UK that was more like a 19-20 point plan, looks like exactly what Ukraine wants. For the most part, and so I'm glad that there's a push for this, but it's unfortunately probably much ado about nothing. Though I should add that there's a complicating factor, I think, in some of these peace plans, and that is for Volodymyr Zelensky. He has to make a decision whether he's going to sacrifice part of the sovereignty of Ukraine and cede that to Russia. And in any deal, whether an election is within 100 days or an election is at the earliest moment possible, Zelensky probably loses that election, in my view, even though he's been popular, because there's cracks starting to show, particularly because the anti-corruption, which is what he ran on in what his television show was about that made him popular in Ukraine, is now coming to the highest levels with his chief of staff resigning. And so there's political calculations that he has to make. Of course, he wants to win the war, but he wants to win the war on his terms. The fact of the matter is he probably can't win the war on his terms. And so how do we get to an end game? Hopefully we can get to one where Ukraine gets peace and security, but I'm just not sure what the formula is for that. And so I'm wondering, going to call back to our previous show that we had, where Tim, you were talking a little bit about Trump maybe getting the Nobel Prize, and I was thinking if the deal as the U.S. Russia went through as it was stated in that document, that 28-point peace plan, I was thinking maybe there could be a Nobel Peace Prize for best concessions to a tyrant or something.
Yeah, I don't. Look, I think that this could lead to peace this year. I just don't think this particular instantiation will. My recommendation for a long time, and I'd be curious what you guys think of this, is, sure, take NATO membership off the table, but don't take U.S. troops off the table. I think the great mistake in this whole thing is when Joe Biden decided to close the U.S. embassy in Kiev. It looked for sure like there was going to be an attack. This is like, I call it the Valentine's Day massacre of 2022. The troops were massing to go into Donbass. They weren't ready to go to Kiev, and then Biden just decided to shut the whole thing down. A very pessimistic mood, which gave a sort of green light for Putin to go for the whole country. Having troops and diplomats in an area has been so effective at deterring World War III. I mean, we have lessons going back to 1945, 46, our troops in Korea, our troops in Japan, the troops in West Germany. And it looked scary, but in the end it works. Deterrence is really effective. It's not paper treaties. It's, flesh and blood alliances. And so I'd like to see some concessions of territory in exchange for, real U.S. troop presence on the ground in the new Ukraine that would prevent future invasions. Would that work, guys?
Not for me, but it's because I'm an old Cold Warrior type. And to me, what would work would be, I mean, right now, the U.S. has spent somewhere around $180 billion. And I think like a third of that, a little more than a third, has been in direct military assistance to Ukraine. If it were up to me, I would double, I would triple that. I would give them Tomahawk missiles. I would give them everything that they wanted, because I don't think, I mean, the line from Biden and the line from Trump is, we can't do that because that might escalate things. Well, at this point, I'm sorry, I don't buy it. I think Trump played Biden. I think Putin played Biden. I think he's playing Trump. And I think it's time for us to stand up against this and just say, listen, here's the deal. We're going to go all in on Ukraine, and let's see what you're going to do about it.
Mike, we don't call that a cold warrior. We call that a hot warrior.
And I'm okay with that, too. I mean, no, you reward aggression with territorial gains. You treat your ally like they're your enemy. And then, well, if that's how we treat our allies, well, then we deserve what we get. We're a crappy friend. And that's no way to run the new or old or any world order.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, Mike, that a great end game here would be a humiliation of Putin and for the United States to stand up to the aggression. You wouldn't see support for that in the public, particularly if it risked American lives or could threaten to throw the world economy into more turmoil. And that's why I'm probably maybe partially with Tim and partially not with Tim on this, which is I don't see a peace deal coming this year. I don't see how there's going to be a peace deal here until Putin gets almost everything that he wants and has so worn down Ukraine where Zelensky has to leave Ukraine or something. Like, I just don't see the end game. And that's really terrible because of the millions of people displaced, the massive impact that it's had on Ukraine, the fear and that it's sent throughout Europe and the European Union and NATO. And so I'm probably full-time pessimist on this one, just because I'm not sure what the end game can be. I want to squint and see something in the 28-point plan from Russia and from the 20-point plan from the E3 that Ukraine was on board with. But there's really no negotiating room in the middle. There's nothing that I see.
Well, it's hard.
That drove me crazy right from the. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Tim.
Well, I was just going to say it's actually really hard to find out the details of these plans, and that there's so much being negotiated that we don't know about. So we're speculating. What we know is that Russia's being very aggressive. I think one of the things I want to ask you guys about is, do you buy the domino theory that, well, if we let them, take this land in Ukraine, then they're going to come for Poland next, and they're going to come from the, Estonia and Latvia and the old part of the Warsaw Pact orbit that the Soviets had control over? I don't buy that. I think this is a pretty simple cut and dried. Moscow wants its land bridge to the Crimea, and I think at this point it's a meat grinder. So the moral side is completely with the Ukrainians, but the realistic side is, I think Ukrainians are tired of the war, and they're getting to be realists. What's the end game? To me, a paper peace with Russia that doesn't have teeth in it, meaning doesn't have foreign troops. Maybe they're even German troops. 10,000 German troops in Kiev would be a real security guarantee. So, Mike, I'm not morally opposed to you. I'm just wondering, realistically, if you can have the perfect be the enemy of the good, and if Ukraine has to keep fighting for another year, at some point, maybe there's a complete collapse. And the Russians actually do take huge chunks of territory. I don't think any of us want that. The president doesn't want that. The Europeans don't want that. How do we get to a realistic peace that prevents a future war?
Yeah, to your point, Tim, I agree with you that I probably don't believe in the domino theory here, but probably that's because Putin has learned a pretty large lesson that he's going to lose a lot of blood and treasure and capital. He thought he was going to walk into Ukraine. It was going to be a couple weeks.
That's right.
They were going to be done. And maybe he goes and marches in Latvia where there's 25% of the population's ethnic Russian, or in Estonia where 20% is, or somewhere else. But I don't think after this 3-4 year experience and however long it's going to take that he's going to have the appetite, or the Russian people would have an appetite if Ukraine falls to him, that they're going to go somewhere next.
I see the domino thing slightly different, and kind of the classic way you described it. But what I'm thinking about, and what I've been thinking about for years now, like a lot of folks, is China and Taiwan. And so in 2027 or whatever, it seems pretty clear that the defense establishment in the U.S. and the intelligence establishment thinks that that's a thing they really want to do, and they're gearing up fairly soon, next couple of years. Well, I mean, look at our past history. We cut and run in Afghanistan when things we cut and run. We're going to cut and run in Ukraine now. I just think it's a horrible precedent for Taiwan, but I think we'll cut and run there too, because we do not have the will. We didn't go into Ukraine with a plan. It was always just give them just enough, but not quite enough. I mean, how hard did Zelensky have to fight to get every little bit of equipment and every upgrade and things? It was always a little bit too late to really make a huge difference. And we're going to do the same thing. I don't have any faith. I think Ukraine is going to, I don't think it's going to fall right away, but yeah, this deal won't go through, and Putin will continue to play Trump just like he played Biden.
Yeah, I'd really love to have a longer conversation on maybe a different show about what is the lesson of Ukraine for Chinese-Taiwan relations and what the U.S. might be willing or not willing to do, what might Xi be willing to do. But that's probably a couple of episodes.
Yeah, probably so.
I do want to toot my horn here a little bit and share something with the audience that a lot of my research in national security has been about where our troops have deployed and the amazing positive impact it's had on economic development. Some others have followed this data set. It's online for listeners that are interested. It's UStroopDeployments.com, and it shows from 1950 through 23, every year, every country, how many U.S. boots were on the ground. And the numbers are kind of staggering. I mean, even as we now talk about, oh no, we don't want to intervene in the Latin America because we've had this dark history. There've been such a small footprint of troops in two places, all of Africa and all of Latin America. The CIA might have been involved down there, but where U.S. troops have been, on average, 155,000 per year, U.S. troops in Germany between 50 and 2023. That totals up to nearly 12 million boots on the ground, 5 million troops in Japan, 4 million in South Korea, 2.6 million in Vietnam. Of course, that was, very concentrated. We've got troops intervening in the United Kingdom right now, in Italy. Like, we've got 11,000 troops on average in Italy all these years. Right now, actually, this started a few years ago, the U.S. put troops in Poland. The 101st Airborne has a big detachment stationed there. I think that's smart. Fascinatingly, I thought we'd always been out of Taiwan. We had 0,000 in Taiwan. Under Barack Obama, they started putting in, I think it was 8, and then a year after that it was 12, U.S. troops visiting Taiwan. Not stationed there technically, right? But we've sent a pretty strong signal, light deterrence in Taiwan. If there's an attack, some American troops are going to be killed, and that's a trigger that the Chinese don't want to pull. I hope we're smart enough to do a little bit of this in Estonia and Latvia going forward to prevent those dominoes from falling.
Yeah, I definitely have some thoughts on how things might unfold in Taiwan. I don't necessarily think it's going to be military, at least at first. But Mike, I think you're right. We could go down that rabbit hole for quite a while. But I should say to folks, I played around with with all the data on the page that Tim put together, and it's really cool. I'll make sure I put a link to that in the show notes. If you're at all a data geek or interested in military type stuff, it is fun for hours. I guess maybe not hours, but it's pretty cool.
I know when we were discussing the show through email this week, I read the paper, looked at the site, and I was excited, and I had all my notes going in that we were going to talk about your paper. But maybe we can do that on another show or maybe a midweek show because it's really awesome. Thanks for sharing that link, Sim.
Everyone wants the Emirates NBA Cup.
And things are heating up.
30 teams started. Bang! But only 8 have advanced to the single elimination knockout rounds. To survive, they'll have to be hungry, relentless, ruthless.
Are you kidding me?
They all want the cup, but only one team can claim it. Who will capture the cup? Emirates NBA Cup knockout rounds begin December 9th on Prime.
This episode is brought to you by Blink. Blink Friday starts now with up to 65% off Blink Smart Security. Check on your pets all season long with new Blink Mini 2K Plus cameras. See your gifts arrive in head-to-toe view with Blink Video Doorbell. Ready to use right out of the box. Just unwrap Blink and go. From pet parents to jet setters to busy families, Blink Friday deals have your holidays covered. Shop now at Amazon.com/Blink.
All right, well, why don't we move on to something a little bit different, to the domestic sphere again. This week, the criminal cases against former FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James were dismissed after District Judge Cameron Curry ruled that the prosecutor, Lindsay Halligan, her appointment that violated federal law as well as the Appointments Clause of the Constitution. Now, the problem with Halligan's appointment is that under the law, the Attorney General can only appoint an interim U.S. attorney for 120 days. And after that, if nobody has been confirmed by the Senate, only the district court can appoint an interim to serve until there's a Senate-confirmed replacement. And so the administration says they're appealing this ruling and that they will keep Halligan on as a special attorney. Attorney General Bondi said Lindsay Halligan is an excellent U.S. attorney and shame on them for not wanting her in office. Now, the government's argument is that nothing in the law, and if you want to look it up, Title 28, Section 546 of the U.S. Code, nothing in that law, they say, prevents the Attorney General from making multiple back-to-back interim appointments, with that 120-day limit only applying to any single individual's appointment. Now, they further argued that even if her appointment was invalid, the cases shouldn't be dismissed because she was a de facto officer and the grand jury made its own independent decision to indict Comey and James, and invoking what's called the harmless error standard. So, Michael, I'll start with you. What's your take on the legality of Halligan's appointment as well as the court's decision here?
So, first of all, watching and listening to a lot of different news analyses and reading so many articles, I mean, the Justice Department in this particular instance looks like it's behaving like the Keystone Cops. And when we look at the actual decision to dismiss this, the judge didn't even reach the merits on the case, right? To refile or the ruling gets overturned. It's still, particularly the Comey one, could be thrown out for malicious prosecution. I don't think that the technicality of her appointment being illegal, it's a constitutional prerequisite. And I don't see, when reading the statute, how the administration is squinting to see that they're basically allowed to have ad infinitum temporary appointees for 120 days. So you can continue to just appoint. What's the point of having the court step in to appoint an acting interim? I mean, there's no point of having that in the statute if the administration can just continue to do 120 days. And so, but I wanted to maybe take just a quick detour a little bit, because when we look at the filing, there's a lot that was wrong with the paperwork. And it's also embarrassing to watch Lindsay Halligan. And when they were going in front of the judge and they asked her about whether or not the grand jury had seen the second indictment. And she said that she stood up and said that they hadn't. And then 24 hours later, she reversed herself and said the transcript showed that it was presented. And if you look at that transcript, it didn't actually say that. The transcript is ambiguous at best and contradicts her at worst. And it's just painfully obvious that Halligan sounds lost. She's probably a great attorney, but she has no prosecutorial experience. She was thrown in this at the last minute in order to serve an indictment on Comey and James, particularly with Comey's, the statute of limitations expiring. And so, you just don't get a redo because you mishandled the appointment, and we'll see what happens in the appeals process. But it definitely looks like it's a legally flimsy case against Comey.
I'm not sure, guys, that this hurts the president's case in the court of public opinion. It looks like so Comey was guilty, but he got off on a technicality. I mean, that's actually you don't put that in the loss column for the Republicans that are upset about this. And remember, we're talking about, in Comey's case, one of the least popular guys to be on the American political scene in decades. No Democrat really wants to defend him on the merits because they feel betrayed that he brought Hillary Clinton's stuff up right before the election, right? Back in 2016. And then I think he tried to make amends by this bogus Russia hoax that somehow there was compromise and leaked it. Nobody denies the merits that this guy was a serial leaker, that he went way out of his bounds as the FBI director, went rogue. So it's not a loss for the Trump team. And I mean, look, the Wall Street Journal, I think, had one of the best headlines. They called them the gang that couldn't indict straight. So they were pretty savage in going after, this is the editorial board at the Wall Street Journal, going after, the Trump team and that, as some of the technical points you guys go over. But I always come back to the mom test. Like, does my mom understand any of this? No. It looks to her like, the bad guys were leaking and creating hoaxes and they got off on a technicality. So, look, I think the Trump's a master at this game, and I'm not going to get caught up into the weeds because I think that's exactly where we lose the audience and they win the long game.
So can I ask you a question, Tim? Sure. Would you then let, from a Trump perspective, maybe this is not your own view, but from a Trump perspective, would you say don't even refile these cases? You've already won, because you can have this argument. Well, they were guilty as hell, but on these technicalities they threw this thing out, and so that they can have the issue but not actually prosecute them.
I don't think, from the Trump perspective, my advice would be to keep fighting, but I'm not sure. Fight the political fight. Don't worry about the legal fight so much. And, if I may, there's a bigger issue that I've heard every president, Republican and Democrat, when they get in office, they go, this confirmation process is broken. Anybody who's been in D.C. has a friend who's like, oh, wow, cool, you got appointed to undersecretary of such and such. And then 9 months later, you're like, hey, Mike, what happened to that appointment? And he's like, well, I'm still waiting. So the Senate's advise and consent process, broken is not a good enough word for what's happened to this. Presidents can't preside. They can't execute as chief executives because this bureaucracy has gone out of control. Again, I think that helps Trump politically to keep this fight going.
I guess what I'd add here is, to me, this is part of a much bigger picture. None of this is about the court cases, I don't think, for the Trump administration. I don't think they care if they get convictions, that's nice. If they get indictments, that's nice. But it's all about letting everyone know that if you go against Donald Trump and his business and his interests, your life is going to be made hell. And so, and we've seen this with countless officials now at this point. It is. I don't disagree, Tim, with you about the confirmation process and so forth. But the bigger picture here is Donald Trump is essentially the mob boss of the United States of America. And if you mess with Donald Trump in any way, he's going to come at you hard with everything he has. The law doesn't matter. It's just to make you suffer and to send a message to everyone else that, hey, do you really want to go at me? Because this is what's going to happen. It doesn't matter if we have a case. We're going to drag you through as much crap as we can. And a lot of good people are going to say, you know what? I got a family. I got a life. I'm sorry. I don't want to sacrifice that.
Yeah, but Trump didn't invent that playbook, man. This is why Letitia James is up there. She was going after him with concocted garbage.
There's concocted garbage, and then there is concocted landfill pile of trash. You're right. Certainly, this is not a new thing. But like with everything else, Trump said, okay, the Department of Justice has been weaponized. And you know what? There's something to that, I think, if you look back, at least in certain cases.
All right, look, Mike,
but then what he did...
I'll grant you this. I think what Letitia James, as I recall, you guys maybe know the nuances more, was elected on a promise that I don't care what happened. I'm going after Donald Trump legally. So vote for me. You get lawfare. Now, she wasn't the Department of Justice, but still, she's an elected official in New York. So it was an elected official in search of a case, whether a case existed. I think they retroactively had to tweak the law to say that he'd violated some. But the lawfare thing is real, and I think calling this the lawfare revenge tour is also real. So yeah, if the Trump administration's fighting fire with fire, they are fighting with the Department of Justice, and so that's raises the stakes of, do we want to live in a country where we have a Department of Justice that goes after its political enemies? I think these are two bad actors, so on the merits, I'm in favor of it, but it does raise concerns.
I think they're two bad actors, which is why on the merits I'm less in favor of it, because I think we have this tendency to say, well, you know what? Hey, these are bad people, or we don't like these people. So you know what? If we forget about a few legal or constitutional niceties, well, so what? They're getting what they deserve, and that is the royal road to authoritarianism, horrific government. I don't want to go down that road. So when it's someone I dislike, think Jim Comey is a self-righteous jackass, certainly. James, I know less about, but I have some issues with her. But those are the folks I want to make sure I go out of my way to extend protections to, because that's when, whether it's in a court of law or just basic civil liberties, those are the people we're just so blithe about. Well, you know what? They're those people, and so what? And I guess the other thing I'll say is there is a huge false equivalence here. It's not just fighting fire with fire. It's fire on one hand and then just a few freaking atomic bombs on the other end. And so there's a huge dissimilarity. It's like saying, well, you know what? You hit me in the nose, so yeah, I just killed your family. Well, it's violence, right? Yeah. Violence is violence. Well, it's not.
All right, Michael, let's let Michael have a word.
Well, first, I want to say that we can probably all agree that the confirmation process is broken, and I think there would be a great podcast episode, maybe a midweek episode, on what are some opportunities to fix it, or is it forever broken? But to come into this, I also agree with you, Mike. I don't want to be out there defending the Jim Comey from a perspective that he's not a showboater, he's not self-righteous, he's all of those things, but he deserves protection, and what he's being prosecuted for is legally flimsy at best. And I don't think a jury in America, even in the reddest of red states, would convict him on the evidence that would be presented. But the thing that I worry about most, and I think I said this on a previous podcast, is the race to the bottom that is going to filter from this, and how many attorneys, career attorneys, have left the Justice Department because they don't want to be there. And also, from what I understand in listening to other podcasts and analyses, it could be that the next Democratic administration that comes in, people are taking names on who's doing what in the Justice Department, who's doing what where in other departments. And I don't like this idea that we used to have, and we should have, a Justice Department and career officials and in other departments who have continuity after administrations leave, that we're basically going to have new administrations come in, fire all of the old career officials or try to force them out, and then hire their own, because then we're just going to get in a cycle of lawfare after lawfare after lawfare. And again, like if the confirmation process is broken, I think that Trump didn't break that, but Trump is certainly breaking so many norms that I'm not sure how you put Humpty Dumpty back together again after he leaves.
Tim, any other thoughts on this one? Go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I have an answer. It's to shrink the federal government. We do have a problem, but it's because it's so big. And there are a lot of little reforms. When I hear about these issues that Michael rightly pointed out, where you have career officials that become replaced and there's a merry-go-round, I think about the Federal Reserve and what happens there, right? So there's constant pressure to take away the independence of independent bodies. I think the CFPB is another one, which I never thought should have existed. That should have stayed under Treasury. But yeah, this all becomes this burgeoning remit that the federal government's going to do all things for all people. Then we lose focus, and our politics are, let's elect this great man to save us from everything. We just need to have a balanced budget amendment, and everything else will be great.
Hey, Mike, you've been doing this podcast for like 10 years. Does it seem like it's really just one episode that it just gets repeated all of the time?
There are certain themes that kind of repeat, yeah, for sure.
This podcast is brought to you by Carvana. Carvana lets you buy your next car on your terms. Explore a massive inventory online, filter for what matters, and find your perfect match. Then choose delivery to your home or pick it up at one of Carvana's iconic car vending machines. Every car also comes with a 7-day money-back guarantee, so you can make sure it's the right fit. Buy your car on Carvana. Delivery or pickup fees may apply. Limitations and exclusions may apply. See our 7-day return policy at Carvana.com.
Carvana.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Okay, well, why don't we move on? Michael, I think you were talking about when we put the stories together for this week. You mentioned there was one you particularly wanted to go into, and I think it's also of a particular interest to myself and Tim, given our military backgrounds.
Yeah. So Mike, first, you gave us marching orders to keep our intros a bit more neutral. So I will say, when I was at the Philadelphia airport last night, I threw away my version of this that was dripping with disdain and rampant sarcasm. And so to our listeners, you're welcome. Or I'm also happy to share my original thoughts in the Discord channel. But so we're going to talk about the Democratic Illegal Orders video and its aftermath. And it's a pretty remarkable collision between politics and the basics of military law. So I'm sure that most of the listeners know, but 6 Democratic members of Congress, all veterans or former national security professionals, released a short video reminding U.S. service members and intelligence officers of something that, frankly, is bedrock, that you must refuse a legal order. That's it. That's the message of the video. And just as a reminder, the lawmakers are Senator Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan, former CIA officer, Mark Kelly, a senator from Arizona, retired Navy captain, Representative Jason Crow, former Army Ranger, Maggie Goodland, who served as intelligence officer, Chris DeLuzio, a former Navy officer, and Chrissy Houlihan, who served in the Air Force. In other words, these are 4 folks who, unlike me, who've lived inside the system. They know Article 92 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. They know that troops are obligated to follow lawful orders and obligated to release unlawful ones. And from my perspective, that seems like intro to the military 101. The response from the administration has been, to put it mildly, intense. The president and several allies have accused these lawmakers of sedition. And the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, has repeatedly described the video as urging troops to disobey lawful orders, noticeably leaving out the word illegal from her messaging. And now we have something even more serious to factor in. I don't know if either of you saw last night, the Washington Post reported that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth gave an explicit spoken directive during the first Caribbean boat strike. The order was to kill everybody. The strike hit a small vessel off the coast of Trinidad, and when 2 survivors were seen clinging to the wreckage, a follow-on strike was ordered to kill them as well, because the standing instruction was that no one should survive. And if we look at the video that was actually released to the public, it didn't show that second strike that killed those 2 folks who were clinging to the boat. A law of war experts interviewed for that piece in the Washington Post said that because the U.S. is not an illegally recognized armed conflict with these individuals, killing any of the men amounts to murder. And one former military lawyer said that even in a war, ordering no survivors would constitute a war crime, an illegal no-quarter order. And all of this is unfolding in the aftermath of the commander of U.S. Southern Command, Admiral Alvin Halsey, who last month announced that he was stepping down early amid reports that he raised concerns about the legality of the strikes in the Caribbean. Layered on top of this is something that I find a little bit extraordinary, and I'd love to see what Tim, you, and Mike think, is that because Senator Mark Kelly is a retired Navy captain, officials are openly discussing whether he could be recalled to active duty and potentially court-martialed for appearing in a video that restates the plain language of Article 92. When lawmakers remind troops to follow the law, and the reaction is to question their motives, threaten investigations, or explore whether a sitting senator can be disciplined by the military, that raises a pretty fundamental question. Why is a basic statement of military law suddenly being treated as suspect? And while I would argue that the Democratic video shouldn't have ignited this kind of firestorm, we also know we live in a polarized political world. The Democratic representatives should not be surprised that it ignited a firestorm. I think that they were trying to provoke the firestorm that they got. So, Tim, Mike, you've both lived under the UCMJ. I haven't. I'm curious how this landed with you, because from the outside, assuming I'm Rip Van Winkle and woke up after 20 years, this doesn't look like a partisan fight. It looks like a debate about constitutional guardrails that historically have not been political at all. So start with you, Tim.
Well, it's an interesting debate in this sense that under President Trump for 4 years, and under the president currently, there are people giving instruction to young officer candidates and enlistees during basic training. This is what a lawful order is. So that hasn't been rescinded. We're educating our troops that they do not have to be like soldiers in any other dictatorial country. The Nazis famously, as I was just following orders, a bad German accent. We don't do that. In all seriousness, and I'm really proud of our military, that continues under President Trump. I think what made the Pentagon upset was this was such a gimmick. And, rather than just deal with the substantive issue, it seemed to, exactly as you said, meant to provoke outrage. I surely didn't appreciate it. I wonder what the motives were of those officials. That said, I want to dig a little bit, guys, into the deeper issue of not just the legality, but the moral rightness of fighting what is a narco-terrorist state in Venezuela that displaced a democracy. The Maduro regime is paper thin. Should we or shouldn't we have a U.S. invasion in Venezuela? And I think there's a very strong case to be made on behalf, not just for U.S. national security and stopping a narco-terrorist state, but on behalf of the Venezuelan people. It used to be one of the wealthiest, most prosperous countries in Latin America, turned hardcore communist 15, 20 years ago, and has just been collapsing ever since. Millions of refugees fleeing to nearby countries, some coming up to the United States, but huge burdens on Colombia in particular. And I think there's a case to be made that, for humanitarian reasons, for national security reasons, there should be a war. There should be an invasion. There will be death. And is it justified? I mean, are there not an immediate threat? So this is just the beginning of something where I think, and what I hear is the Secretary of War is very much in favor of that, and others say that's not MAGA. We need to be isolationists. So President Trump is proving to be not the isolationist that some of his supporters wanted, and some on the left have said, oh, he's not going to be involved in human rights. Well, frankly, bizarrely, these strikes on the boats are part of a larger human rights campaign for Venezuelans, and I think there's a good reason to cheer that on.
I disagree with a lot of that, but before I get to that kind of interesting side road, I think I got to say on the orders, on the illegal orders, and that I agree it was a gimmick. I liked it. It was a smart gimmick because I think if the administration had been a little less of what it is, I think the best response would have been to laugh it off, to say, oh my God, we don't give illegal orders, not a problem. But of course, that's not how the Trump administration works. And hey, if they court-martial, I hope they do try to get Kelly back to active duty and court-martial him. I think that would be great. Kelly sure would love it for his presidential run. I mean, the only person to be super disappointed would probably be Gavin Newsom, I guess. But this, I think, it was strategically a smart thing to do. I would also say, as to what constitutes a legal or illegal order, it's not always very clear. There's a lot of there are some obvious cases. If your CEO says, hey, go to McDonald's and kill 3 people, that's an illegal order. But a lot of times when you're dealing with like the Venezuela case, that's not necessarily all that crystal clear. And military law does not expect service members to make sort of these fine-grained judgments. The assumption is that orders are legal if they are given, orders by superiors are legal, only if like the average person would just say, oh my God, this can't be right. Then you're okay. And so it's not as clear cut, I think, as a lot of people maybe think that it is. Now, as for the Venezuela part of it, I think given our incredibly pathetic record of nation building, it would be a horrible idea to go in and invade Venezuela. I think we've shown that we just do not have we're not willing to devote the resources, don't have the political will, the stomach for what that kind of thing takes. So we should just stay out of it. I don't think Donald Trump is trying to do anyone a favor. I think Donald Trump likes to be a big, tough man who likes to see bad hombres from south of the border killed, and that makes him feel big and tough, and that's not a whole lot more to it than that, regardless of what the Secretary of Defense, who wants to call himself the Secretary of War, because, I don't know, I'm sure his hands are perfectly normally sized, just wants to do that. Okay, fine.
Yeah,
Sorry,
and,
laughing at the mic off to let you take your rant.
No, I was just going to say, obviously, we've gone a little bit further afield, right? Like, because we could talk either about Venezuela, we could talk about how we could look at this under the War Powers Resolution, or Congress could declare war, that there's an armed conflict happening between the United States and Venezuela, which is not happening. But I'm intrigued by your perspective of invading Venezuela for human rights considerations, because as a progressive, certainly I care about human rights. Venezuela also is unique in the sense that they have a lot of oil, and there has been and there are a lot of Venezuelans in Florida in particular, and so this has some resonance with the president's base. But I wonder, Tim, what are some other conflicts throughout the world where there are terrible regimes? And I'll grant you, Chavez was terrible. I went to Venezuela, Margarita Island, so not really Venezuela, in the early 2000s and saw the devastation that he was bringing to Venezuela even then. Mm-hmm. And Maduro has continued that. It's a corrupt state. They rig elections. Maduro should not be president of Venezuela now. But are there other instances of countries where you think that the United States should engage in nation building or regime change that don't have a lot of oil? Because there's a lot of bad actors. There's a lot of bad countries out there. And so I sort of wonder, are we trying to back into a war? And is Trump trying to do everything he can to provoke something? Is he preparing for an invasion? Because he and Maduro just talked on the phone recently this week. We don't know exactly what they talked about. But is Maduro going to do some sort of deal to leave Venezuela and give the United States entree into Venezuela? I'm not sure, but I'm just sort of curious, what's the end game in other places for for human rights? And are you a Wilsonian liberal internationalist where we should be going and engaging in regime change on the basis of human rights?
Thanks for the serious question. I have described American power as Promethean, right? I think there's never been a country like this. Colin Powell famously said, we had so many troops that we sent to Europe during World War I, World War II, other places around the world. And the only land that we've asked for, the only land that we've taken is space to bury our dead. There's never been a country like America. It is Promethean. We do believe we have this grand view that all humans deserve equal dignity and deserve liberty. Holding that view as a realist, I'm not sure it's wise to go around invading countries, right? I think that's going to backfire. But when there is a popular desire to have American forces there, that's a smart time to get engaged. So I think we should look for long-term partners in the Middle East, not necessarily to invade, but that creates a larger pacifying effect. It creates a security umbrella. This is what my research has shown. You see substantive increases in GDP per capita. The irony is we're so actually gun-shy about getting involved in Latin America that we have a very little footprint there. We have an Africa command that I think to this day still doesn't have its headquarters in Africa. If we could find that one ally, like Japan and Korea turned out to be, those countries blossomed first. It led to an Asian miracle. And you guys may remember in the 1940s and 50s, Asia, people thought China was going to be permanently poor, that clearly Africa was going to develop. And in fact, the reverse happened. So I think you're right, Michael. I think it's very smart what the Trump administration is doing, is showing a willingness to use troops alone may cause some sort of a compromise where Maduro leaves power and we get to restore democracy just by having the willingness to engage, if not actually going into conflict. Let me turn it around and say, is Venezuela currently a narco-terrorist state? Yes or no? Because that to me shapes everything else we're talking about.
So it's funny. I was reading a BBC article on this, the Cartel de los Soles, and does it exist? Does it not exist? Is Venezuela a narco terrorist state, or is it not? And certainly we can say that there are members of the Venezuelan military who engage in some drug trafficking. There is evidence to that. There's also obvious evidence that it is an authoritarian, repressive regime. And so when I look at the analyses that other folks have done, because I'm not an expert on it, I like the BBC's analysis that it's probably the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. They're not a narco-terrorist state, but they're also not free of drug trafficking as a corrupt institution.
Yeah, that'd be my take as well. But I guess go ahead, Tim.
I was just going to ask a question because I know, Mike, you mentioned something that the hypothetical of sending somebody into McDonald's to kill a few people, and there's things that are obvious that are illegal. But I'm kind of curious because if I'm an individual troop, I don't have the capacity to ask a JAG lawyer, hey, is this command, is this order lawful or not? But I'm sort of like wondering, when you look at some of these bombings of the boats in the Caribbean, in the Washington Post article, one current JAG, not on record, said that there's no world where this is legal, what the administration is doing. And you've had some lawyers leave, you've had some grumblings. And so I'm sort of like wondering, if I'm an individual troop and I'm trying to, how can I even assess the order if I'm the one who's sitting to push the button that sends the bomb? Am I just basing it on, does this seem logical to me that this would be legal? Like, how am I behaving in those instances?
And that's where I think the administration actually had something of a point, if they hadn't gotten all hysterical about the sedition thing, saying that this can be a complex thing, and you really do not want to get those individuals at that ground level who are in charge of actually executing the operation to say, well, gee, should I do this? Should I not? That is a really bad way to run a military. And so in that sense, I think you can say, yeah, it was a stunt, and maybe that's a problem. It's not like the troops are, watching these folks in this video and saying, oh, this is food for thought or anything. I mean, it's a political stunt, right? But there's a reasonable point there, and I think that you bring that to light, Michael, in saying that, well, no, we don't. That's why there is the default is to say that an order is lawful unless it is just absolutely 100% like going to McDonald's and killing people clear if you're that person. Now, officers are held to a different and higher standard, as they should be. And so if there is going to be any fallout from that sort of thing, it should happen at the command level, not at the level of the troops.
So let me ask you both this one question, just from your perspective as to whether or not this is a legal order or not. So take the specific example that the Washington Post reported on last night. Let's just say that Pete Hegseth, let's assume the administration is pushing back on some of this, but let's assume that Pete Hegseth made a verbal order to leave no survivors. And let's just say that in the first attack, the video comes and shows that there's 2 survivors to the attack who are clinging on to the boat. And you were the person who was responsible for pushing the button, and you were being told, okay, we said no survivors, go kill those 2 people who are clinging to the boat. Do you think that's a lawful order that should be followed, or is that an illegal order?
Well, I'll speak up here. This idea of the warfare being lawful or unlawful to me comes down to how do wars even get declared anymore? I mean, since Vietnam, we haven't. I think the GWOT was the only declared war, the global war on terror, and that was quasi-declared authority. The line has been blurred in America. The Congress really isn't declaring wars. It's the president making executive decisions. And that comes down to a fundamental sort of democratic, spiritualistic, did the people support this or not? And in this case, I think the public is very strongly in support of fighting a narco-terrorist state, places that are bringing poison into our country and killing people, killing our families in our neighborhoods and our suburbs. There's no difference, Michael, between the first strike and the second strike. So I wouldn't have a problem with the second strike. Certainly not if I didn't have a problem with the first strike. Go back to Ulysses S. Grant and Dwight Eisenhower's strategy of fighting for unconditional surrender. I mean, what if an enemy on a meta level, this is like, well, we're done. We don't want to fight anymore. It's like, no, we're going to go all the way until we kill Adolf Hitler and we liberate the camps. In this case, I find it intolerable, and a lot of people do, that there's a narco-terrorist state that is terrorizing our country and that is a dictatorship over their own people.
But Tim, if you say that there's no difference between the first strike and the second strike, let me give a different example. Let's just say that there's a legitimate military target that we're going after in war. So let's take this out of this particular example. And we bomb it, and then we go in and we find that there's a few survivors. Do we shoot them on sight, even though they're showing that they're not a threat to us? Or do we actually arrest them and put them and take them as a prisoner of war? The logic that you just gave, and I'm not saying you said this, and so I want you to respond. The logic you said is like, okay, if we see the survivors, let's shoot them too.
No, I hear what you're saying. I think I put myself in that situation. My lie is basically a learning case. So we've come full circle here, back to what's an illegal order. And when your lieutenant says, well, just kill all the women and children in the village, and do you gun them down? No. Yeah, I think that's an lawful order. This is an issue of combatants. I don't know, and I don't know the status. I don't know if there was a second strike, to be honest. I don't know if Hegseth, there's a lot of hearsay. So I don't want to give a full blanket endorsement of that, because I don't know what that is. My point is, I'd like us to focus philosophically on the first strike. Is it a lawful order to take the first strike? Because I think that's what the video was that these the senators and representatives made, was, questioning whether these were lawful strikes on boats, that maybe there's no arms whatsoever. These are just drug-running boats, but they're in international waters. There's no declared war. I think the American people are strongly in favor of that strike. I personally am. And so then, you get into a gray area. But the first strike is what I want to know. Where do you guys land?
But sorry, I'll just say, like, one quick comment. I don't want to judge what should be right because the American public supports something. That the public may support the strikes, and you're right, the polling evidence does suggest that they do. But I don't want that to be the litmus test of whether something is legal or not. Sorry, Mike, to interrupt.
No, I was just going to say that to me, there's an even larger point here. And to me, the larger point is what is the role of the military in our society? And do we want a professional, nonpartisan military, or do we want a sort of a Praetorian Guard? And I think I know what Donald Trump wants. I think he wants a Praetorian Guard. He wants a group of people who will unquestion from 4 stars all the way down to the privates will unquestionably do anything that he wants and with immediately. And that to me is scary as hell. That to me is the bigger question. Once we start, I mean, how this should work, I think in general, there's a lot of gray area. And so what happens in the real world, I think in these situations is someone says, well, listen, is this a lawful order? I mean, someone up the chain says, well, I don't know. This could be a problem for my career if this comes out. Someone doesn't do it. And then all of a sudden they get court-martialed, but then it comes out it might have been an unlawful order. There's a bunch of bad publicity and so forth. And I mean, this is how the system tends to work in the real world. It's not like people, going into seminar rooms saying, lawful order or not. I don't know. But so.
And Mike, like to your point, I mean, I think you're exactly right. I mean, and this is the part that I get most concerned about with the Trump administration versus any other administration, whether it was Obama or Bush or first Bush or Reagan or Clinton, is that there's a tendency almost to believe that the military or the Justice Department is signing an oath to Donald Trump and not to the Constitution. He has referred on a number of occasions to my generals. They're not his generals. They're the United States of America's generals, and they're carrying out the Constitution. Yes, they're carrying out chain of command and following orders that are lawful and the like, but also, my Justice Department. And so that's the part that does concern me is how do we make sure that they're acting lawfully and that the military sees themselves as not just obeying the commander-in-chief, but that their fidelity is to the Constitution and the constitutional channels.
Yeah, look, guys, I think you're making good points, but I also think we're talking past each other. So I've talked a couple times about Venezuela. Let's not get caught in what does Trump want, Praetorian Guard. I don't think so. You make a good point, but who cares? Like, we're going to agree to disagree about what we think of Donald Trump. What do we think about Venezuela, right? Is it morally right to wage a war that Congress will never declare in order to liberate millions of people from let's call it communism?
No, it's not, Tim. No, you're totally wrong on that. It is not right because you don't break the constitutional order because something might be a good idea. I mean, that's what it comes down to. Donald Trump actually, I believe, has had a couple at least of good ideas, a whole lot of bad ideas, but I don't care how good they are. I don't care if they were lollipops and six-packs for everyone for free. You don't just throw the rule book out and say, you know what? The ends justify the means in this case. And that just is so fundamentally wrong that I understand other people might be more kind of instrumentalist, more ends justify, but I just cannot, as a rule, I cannot accept that. Not at all.
Well, I disagree, but I appreciate that this is something substantive. So,
Yeah.
Michael, how about you?
Well, I was going to say, but first I want to say, Mike, that's about the most passionate I've seen you in a long time. So I love to see you. I love to see you fiery. But to your point on, just to take Venezuela as an example. Yeah, I want Maduro out. I would love to see him out. I would love to see China become a democratic state and that the Communist Party would lose its power. I would love to see the war in Ukraine end. But as Mike talks about, there are certainly ways to make this happen and ways that it's never going to happen. And so I'm definitely with Mike on that the ends don't justify the means, that you don't break the Constitution in order to get the result that you want, because what that will do is that will set the precedent that if we all believe in something and the public opinion polls say it, then let's just go ahead and do it.
All right, look,
damn the constitutional order.
I'm not saying like Tim's the guy that wants to break the Constitution. This is not, you guys are paying me like, all right, fine.
Yeah.
No, but what about the strikes on Libya, right? What about the interventions? Were those authorized strikes? We took, I mean, I think this was under Obama and Hillary Clinton, right? The famous, the Benghazi thing. But fundamentally, it came down to, should we decapitate Libya? And I think that was a massive mistake. Now you've got a complete failed state. So I'm actually super cautious about when you want to use power in unconstitutional, constitutionally gray areas. And I think that was a mistake. But gee whiz, I don't see anybody calling for Obama to, he broke the Constitution. Let's put him in the slammer. And calling him having his Praetorian Guard execute that. So to me, what's the smart play? Libya was a bad use of American power. I don't think putting the Ford aircraft carrier, the USS Ford, down in the waters off Venezuela, I think that's brilliant. And if a strike happens there, or frankly, if they just landed 200 Marines, I don't think anybody in Venezuela would want to mess with them. They could arrest the guy legally and put him up for his own crimes and end a narco-terrorist state. So I think we should push the envelope here, not break the Constitution, though.
I see what you're saying, Tim, and in terms of the result, I think we're all in agreement here, but that reminds me of, say, well, we'll just send some Marines and it'll be over, quickly. I seem to recall Vladimir Putin's thinking a similar thing about Ukraine. I mean, these things, you know how it is. Everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. And being the invader is very different than being the defender. And so if you're talking on one end about a sort of a surgical limited strike, and on the other end, going into a sovereign country's territory because you've decided you want to change their government, that is an order of magnitude
big
different. I'm not saying at some time that it doesn't.
Listen,
go ahead.
The Ukrainians hated Putin, and the Venezuelans love America. They're begging us to intervene because they can't do it themselves.
Doesn't matter.
It's a huge difference, though.
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, sure we can. I was not expecting that, but that was an interesting conversation, and probably more on that. I don't think we're going to just sort of forget about Venezuela. I know Donald Trump won't, the administration won't. So, but why don't we leave things right there for today, guys? And we have so much more we want to talk about. We're going to get to that on the midweek show. Bunch of stuff I am eager to engage with you guys on. But for now, just want to say, remember those 2 deals I talked about. Again, if you want to support the show or increase your support, this is probably the best time of the year for this 1 week to do that because you get those discount rates. Again, check that in the show notes. And as always, if you want to get everything that we offer, ad-free versions of all the stuff, want to get access to that Discord, you can be a supporter. But if you're not able to financially support the show and you do want to get all of our stuff, just send me an email, mike@politicsguys.com, and I will make sure that happens. We never want to let financial issues get in the way of you hearing whatever nuggets of wisdom or weirdness we have to drop on you. So, and also, I want to say that whether you're a supporter or not, it really does help if you subscribe, rate, and review us on your podcast apps, as well as sharing episodes on social media. And finally, as always, before we go, thank you so much to our fantastic executive producers. They are Wilma Moreno, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, Don Oglesby, Derek Schmidt, Dakota Heath, Jason Chrysler, Dave Dean, Jeremy Larson, Brian Matza, and Jody Marie Miller. We'll be back with a new episode for you next week. We hope you'll join us.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,